Hello and welcome. In this tutorial, we'll be looking at dependency injection and how to use it. We'll develop a simple feature that retrieves some data from the imaginary API or database, and we'll do it the simplest possible way, almost against all the rules in object-oriented programming. Then we'll separate the concerns by just dividing things into more structured architecture. And then we will see how testable it is and what problems do we face when we encounter that kind of architecture. And we will then convert that into using dependency injection pattern. And we will do that by using a .NET Core built-in dependency injection functionalities. I think we may just start with a bit of a requirements. What do we need to follow this tutorial? So there are a few concepts you should be familiar with, just to focus on the dependency injection instead of trying to learn everything at once. The first is basic knowledge of C# and .NET Core web app architecture. We'll be working on out-of-the-box web app provided by Visual Studio. So if you ever created the web application in .NET Core using MVC, you certainly have seen that code before. And the second requirement is knowledge of MVC pattern, standing for Model View Controller. That's also quite simple. I'm just using that. I could be using anything else, but for this example, I just decided to go with this. And it may be implicit if you already satisfy the above, but basics of object-oriented programming, especially polymorphism, are kind of important to have before we start. Okay, so let's start with creating a new project. Run your Visual Studio and click Create a New Project. Select ASP.NET Core Web Application in C# and press Next. And then name your web application. I'm gonna just go for Dependency Injection Tutorial. Create. If you want to follow what I'm doing, just choose web application with model view controller. That's MVC. I'm just familiar with that. I think it's easy to understand, and I think it's important that we focus on dependency injection idea rather than trying to learn Angular or React or whatnot. Give it some time to do its thing, and there we are. So if you open Solution Explorer, you can see your standard MVC with your models, your controllers, and your views. A couple of pages in Home, Index, which is a home page, and a privacy page. Home controller, we'll just focus on that class right now. Oh, that's large. Your index and privacy page rendering code is here. Okay. Oh, let's just run that first and see if it works okay. This should be a very simple, out-of-the-box web application with homepage and privacy page. No fireworks there. There you go. Okay. So what we'll do is we'll implement a simple data retrieving feature. We'll prepare some example data and display it in a table on the page. Let's start with the model. So inside of that home controller class, I'll just create a new class called public class animal. This will be, by the way, a list of animals that I have on my farm. I do not have a farm, but we will pretend I do. So we'll give them IDs. We will give the animal the string of type. Oh my goodness! Right, that didn't go very well. We will give an age, maybe. We can go for character. Oops, string character, and we can go for gender. That looks kind of fine. It doesn't really matter what it is. What matters is we've got our view model. And let's also get data method. So we'll make it a public static method that will return a list of animal, and we'll just name it get all animals. And here we can just, this is going to be the mock data basically. So animals equals new list of animal. We'll just do that instead and introduce some animals. So hello animals, that's new animal. First of all, ID equals 1, age equals 5, 3, character equals naughty, very naughty animal, and it will be a very naughty male and a very naughty male bear. We can copy that across a few times and just randomize a little. So give them different IDs, doesn't really matter what they are. Oh no, I just want them to be unique. That's the only requirement. They will be different ages. Whoa, that is a very old bear, but whatever. They're all naughty, so we'll just make this one horrible, and this one very nice, and this one cool, this one amazing, and this one, yeah, I can say naughty. This is going to be a female, this is going to be a male, this is going to be a female, this is going to be a male, this is going to be a female. It doesn't really matter. They're all bears. We don't want them all to be bears, so there's going to be a wombat even. This is going to be a rhino. Did I just misspell that very badly? Jesus, no, please. Is that what it is? I don't know. Capybara. Should stick to animals that I know how to pronounce and spell. And this will be a pig. There you go. Semicolon and return animals. Animax. That sounds right. And cool. So now we can edit that privacy page to be animals. And this will return a view. And let's create a view. So save that page, go to Solution Explorer, and then in Home, we can just add a view. And just empty razor view, add, and name it animals. Done. And what I prepared here is I went to Bootstrap's documentation and took an example table of the docs. This is what it is. It's literally it. I just want to show that we can render some data on the page. Get rid of this because it's a razor syntax and it will complain. And now perhaps we should go to our navbar, which is in _layout, and change that privacy page to be now pointing to action in the controller, but the animals action, the one that we just changed. And just this button will just show, or this link will just show animals instead of privacy. Okay, cool. If I just run it now, it says animals, great. If I click on it, there you go. Just a simple table with some example data. This is not the data we want though, so let's just quit that now and make this work. How do we do that? Well, we will need to make some changes. We've got that method getAllAnimals to return the example data. So let's just return it here. So our model equals getAllAnimals. That will be a list of animals and we can pass it to here. But that's not everything, because that view now expects a model to be passed in. So if you go here to our view, we now have to specify a model. So model is going to be a list of dependency injection tutorial dot controllers dot home controller dot animal. There you go. This is the namespace to that currently the animal model is in. This sucks. It shouldn't be like this, but let's leave it for now. I'll change it later on. Right. So there is a ID, there is type, there is age, there is character, there is gender. And then in the body, we only need one row because we will just iterate over. So each row, so we just need some code here. Let's just open the code bracket, place the table row inside of it, and here iterate. So it will be for each, just use a for each loop, which just makes things a bit easier. For each item in the model, the model is a list, so it can be iterated over, and then we can display item.id, item. Let's erase your syntax. Item.type, and in fact that's easier. Gender, character, age. So this is the view. So this will iterate over the model, which is a list, and for each of these item in the list, it will create a row of values that will basically create a whole table. And we already said in a home controller we have animals, so this method will be responsible to render that animals view, and we have a model creation method, and we pass this to this model to the view, which is passed in here and described in here. Cool. So technically, only technically, if I run it now, we should be able to see the table of our animals on the page. And here it is. Okay, that works just fine. Cool. So that's all nice and all. But when you look at that code in a home controller, it's not great, because we obviously have a home controller, which is considered in our domain layer. And we have a class here, a model class inside. We have a list. We have the method here that sort of is like a data access layer method. So there's a few things that we have to do here to make this a little bit more bearable. First, let's create some folders, okay? Normally I'll create new projects, but it doesn't really matter for this use case. So data access will be a folder. I have a add new file extension in Visual Studio, so I press Shift and F2 and you get that window, and you can create folders. So data access, and then we'll add a file in it called farm API wrapper. We'll pretend this is a farm API that returns certain things from the farm. We will only focus on getting the animals list, so we don't overcomplicate things. Okay, so let's just press add file, and there it is. And also, we will now create a service. So again, we'll create a new folder called services. If I can, okay, I can't type. An animal service. .cs. We already have models folder, so we'll leave that. Going back to our home controller, we know we can definitely move that getAllAnimals method to the data access class. So I cut it and go to farm API wrapper, and then we may just create a I just use this method and then remove the static keyword. The animal class is not referenced here, but before we do reference it, we change the namespace of it and we just move it to the where it belongs, to models. folder. So cut it, and then Solution Explorer, in models, we create a new file called animal. And in here, we can just paste that code. So now the namespace is going to be dependency injection tutorial.models. Cool. Back to our Farm API wrapper, and then you can press Control and dot, and this will give you some options. You have the using dependency injection tutorial.models on top. Just press Enter. This will add a using statement automatically. Cool. So that's referenced now, and everything is tip-top. Just to make things a little bit more interesting, we'll just change this to return an I enumerable instead of a list. Okay. So now the idea of this is that we have a Farm API wrapper that is generally only to grab the raw data. We then have an animal service which will be responsible for kind of processing data, and then it will return the processed data. Generally, you can treat it, for example, in the real world application. You would use the Farm API wrapper to get that raw data. And so we'll just make this public method return a list of animal. Bring the namespace in. Get all animals from my farm. We just name it that. And here we will need to new up a Farm API wrapper. So var API equals new Farm API wrapper. Control dot, and we can bring the data access namespace. Enter. Cool. We have that API. So as we know, the API has a method called getAllAnimals. So just create a variable called animals equals API.getAllAnimals. Boom. Done. We have animals variable, and that should hold a list of animals. Now, if I try to return animals, it will complain. Why? Because this method is supposed to return a list, and getAllAnimals return a I enumerable. So I only done it so we can see that this class is actually doing something rather than just returning whatever we returned from the API. So this is the processing we're doing on that collection. We enumerate it, so add it as a list. Cool, so now we return a list of animals. So what's happening right now is we have animal service that is calling or newing up a Farm API wrapper and calls that getAllAnimals and then turn it to a list. But we don't use, as you can see here, 0 references. We don't use the animal service anywhere. So we should probably go to our home controller and new it up here. So var service equals new animal service. We have to do control dot and bring in the namespace as well. And then the model will be service dot getAllAnimals from my farm. That way we have a service in our controller, and then this service can return some animals from the farm by calling the Farm API wrapper and converting the I enumerable to a list. That's as simple as it is. Right, so this may look familiar if you worked with applications where we have separate of concerns. So you have a domain layer, which is your home controller here, or your UI project normally. You have the logic, so it goes out under different names, but a logic layer, sometimes BRL, business rules layer. And you've got your DAL, which is data access layer. I just use folders in this example, so we don't overcomplicate things. So you have data access here, models and services. Once those are hooked together, we can now run this, and technically it should all go good, but it won't, because I forgot to do something, which is I'm sure I did not update a model in the view. And there it is. The animal model does not exist because it now exists in model.animal. No models. And there it is, updated the view. This is only because you have to kind of use the full namespace here. And by the way, we did not touch any of the dependency injection just yet because we are preparing our project. I want to give you a full understanding of what is happening here and why. Just to review what is happening right now. The animal's view renders the page using a model. The model is passed in via the animal's controller method. Here. The controller method uses the animal service class to grab the prepared data. Animal service class uses the farm API wrapper class to download the data from the imaginary API and process it. At the moment, it only converts the IEnumerable to a list, but it can do other things like converting a raw API response into a view model, etc., etc., etc. And generally, you now have a separation of concerns where each class has only one purpose. Farm API wrapper, grab the raw data from the API. Animal service, process the data. Home controller, render the data. So hopefully that all makes sense so far. Now, there are some problems with that structure. Let's say we want to test the animal service class. So we can create a new test project and add animal service test class. Let's just do that now. So right-click on the solution, add new project. And then you can just type test in here and look for an unit test for C#. Important because there are also test projects for F# and just not to get confused. Okay, so press next. And then my convention is usually the assembly name that we're trying to test, and then .tests. So in my case, it's going to be dependency injection tutorial.tests. Sweet and squeezy. Let's just maybe rename that class first from unit test 1 to animal service tests, and also rename the class itself. Cool, that looks good. And the first method that we will be testing is can get all animals from my farm. The way I test things is I create those three comments: arrange, act, assert. Arranging the data is going to be bringing in the animal service class. If I do control dot, it doesn't really allow me to bring in anything. So what I can do is go to Solution Explorer and right-click on the tutorial test, select Add and Project Reference. And here I can add the reference manually to the main tutorial project and press OK. This way, I should be able now to reference. Okay. So we have the SUT, animal service, we can now act. So now we will test that. Bar result equals SUT.get animals from my farm. And then if I now try to assert it, I can now bring in the result and say if the result is null, fail the test. If it's not, pass it. If you just open Test Explorer, it should load in all the tests, and there they are. So if you now go here, and there's just one test here, if you run it, should technically pass. Okay, that looks great. But what if we receive a null from the farm API wrapper? Let's try that now. So let's go to the getAllAnimals method in the API and just return null as a first line. Everything else will go dark because this code will never get executed. Essentially what we're doing is returning null first thing that this class is getting invoked. Obviously no one would ever do that, but I'm just trying to make a point here. Let's see. Run the test, and the test is failing. So, oops. The test is now failing, but we are testing the animal service. which we know that works just fine. So what happened? The way the application is written, if any dependency of animal service, which is currently just farm API wrapper, is broken, the test will fail and indicate that there is a problem with animal service. It would be great to be able to mock the API response and focus on testing only what animal service is doing, which is simply calling a toList on IEnumerable of results. But how do we do that with the current code base? The answer is we can't. We're stuck with the instantiated data access class right here. Another problem is with this particular scenario is that each time we're testing the animal service, if the farm API wrapper was calling a real API, we would end up calling the API each time. That could not only get expensive, but what if the test code ends up deleting some data or posting some unwanted data via the API? One could argue that this test is failing now and there should be some sort of guard here against this being null. Like, oops, not like this. Like an if statement saying if animals doesn't equal null. But we want to control exactly what we're testing in each test. So we want to separate any dependencies from anything that happens inside of that class. Because here, all that's happening is we're using some other service in these two lines of code and then process it. So just adding to list. So we should be only testing this and be able to mock this. This way, we will be able to set this response to null, then another test set this response to, I don't know, maybe collection of 0, see what that happened, and then collection of 1, then see what result do we get. You know, that's how testing works. So this is not very good. Another issue that I see here is that if the class is a bit more complex, so animal service class, you can't see right away what does it depend on. If you have a look at that class, it has a parameterless constructor, and it's not obvious just by looking at it which dependencies are present here. You can construct a class without any parameters, and it's always going to instantiate that farm API wrapper inside of it. So one solution to those problems would be to move the farm API wrapper to the constructor of animal service. This will allow us to see the dependencies right away in our constructor. It will also give us opportunity to mock farm API wrapper class and pass it to the animal service constructor in the test class. So let's try doing that. We can create an instance. So let's say private read-only farm API wrapper. Call it API, and then pass it here. So farm API wrapper API, and then API, just pass the API. Cool. So now every time we construct animal service, we'll have to pass that farm API wrapper instance. Where do we use that? Well, we use animal service only in home controller. So here we'll have to pass a new farm API wrapper class, and that should work just fine. So if I now decide to, and before I do that, I go to animal service, and here I don't have to instantiate that anymore. We can comment that out, and here, instead of using the API, I just use an underscore. Underscore is just a convention I'm using to specify that this is a private variable, which is, I guess, worth noting. Okay, so it should, technically it should work just fine. So let's just try to run that code and see if it does exactly what it was doing before. And then we'll see if the test passes. So it doesn't. Why is that? Oh, of course, because we did not change the null. So we just go back to farm API wrapper and get that null out of the way. Boom. Run it again. Animals, and then there you go. Works as expected. Now let's go back to our test class and do exactly that. So what we can do is install a framework called MockU. So if I now create a new variable, or we can actually do it here. First of all, pass, so create a API equals new farm API wrapper, and then control dot, bring the namespace, and then pass the API here. We now essentially did whatever we've done before. So whatever it looked like before, it's an animal service with an API. That's not what we want though. We want to mock it. So we actually want a new mock of farm API wrapper. This will not, the namespace is not here. You've got install package mock. You just find and install latest version. And that's installed now. We have mock of farm API wrapper. This is squiggly line because API.object will now be the actual farm API object. Here we can use the API.setup, and this takes a lambda function. You specify the method that you're testing, and then you can specify the return value of that. Now we can just set that it returns a new list of animal. So we don't overcomplicate things. That will be a list of 0 items, but it doesn't really matter that much. And then another collection, system collection generic. Cool. So this will return a new list, and that should technically pass, but it fails. And why does it fail? Oh well, we're trying to mock a concrete class, and a mock you, some will argue probably, but it's generally advised to mock the interfaces. This is where polymorphism comes in, and it's a very easy way to create an interface from an existing class. You just control dot on the public on the class and extract the interface. So choose that. It will default to I and the name of the class, which is fine. So iFarm API wrapper does the job. You can have a look that it's only got one method, and now we can potentially change the dependency in animal service to be now using farm API wrapper, and then have that also in the constructor. Home controller should not complain because farm API wrapper is an instance of iFarm API wrapper interface. However, now save that. However, now if we go back to the test, we can just change that to the iFarm API wrapper, and this should now pass. It should now pass because the result is not null, it's an empty list of animal. But now all we do is test. Yeah, so you see that the test is passing. All we do is test the get all animals from my farm and nothing else. We only test this line. We set up the mock to return the empty list when this method is called, and that's it. One thing to notice is that in the current structure, imagine that animal service has more than one dependency. Let's say it's got 10 dependencies. How fun would be this? And then not very fun. And then imagine that each of these dependencies have their own dependencies. Oh wow. So dep of dep 1, the dep of dep 2. It becomes a little bit ugly. Okay, so let's just get rid of that. That's a code smelly. That's something you don't want to do. So how to construct those services so you don't have to be stuck with those, newing up those services. You also, obviously, if you want to test now, if you want to test this home controller, this is going to be a bit weird, because if you want to test animals method, you now have animal service here and farm API wrapper here. So obviously same logic here. You would, let's just get rid of this. you would also move it to the controller. So animal service moves to the controller, and then farm API wrapper would also have to be in the controller. So this is not great, but it does work. Let's see what else we can do to make it better. This is where dependency injection comes in really. Let's start with how does the framework know that we want to inject anything, and how do we inject it, and what is it in the first place? So let's go to our startup class. I'll save home controller for now and go to the startup class right here in your main folder. There is a method called configure services. If you are using .NET Core, no problem. You can use the built-in dependency injection functionality. You can choose between add singleton, add transient, and add scoped. I think what those are is out of scope of that tutorial. The way you define your injection is by adding this line of code, and I'll explain that in a second. So ifarm API wrapper, farm API wrapper, and control dot, let's bring in the namespace, and voila. What happens here? This code, this one line of code, tells the framework one thing. If you encounter a class that has ifarm API wrapper in its constructor, if not told otherwise, construct farm API wrapper with a default constructor or the simplest constructor that it's got. Then, if we go to our animal service, this is exactly what's happening. Our ifarm API wrapper is in a constructor of animal service. Okay? We don't have to change anything in here because this is exactly how dependency injection works. But if we run that code right now, nothing will change. And the answer why is very simple. Because this animal service is used by a home controller. And it's newed up manually. This will just do whatever it did previously. It will not inject any dependencies because we just construct it here. If you were using dependency injection, you really have to go with that design pattern all the way. So what can we do here? Well, why not just inject animal service as well? So if I comment that out and introduce a private read-only variable of animal service, and call this service, and then animal service, sorry, forgot about the underscore, and then the service equals service. Done. We do want animal service to be an interface. Before we change that, there is a way to inject a concrete class. And this is using a lambda function, so just like this. New animal service. And here you can actually pass and then bring the namespace, of course, control dot. That's it. But we don't really, well, this will complain because obviously it needs farm API wrapper. So so we'll inject it like we injected the other. And this is the way to go really, unless you have a justifiable reason. So animal service, and then animal service. We don't really have animal service, but if I press F12 on animal service and then control dot here and extract interface, just confirm we now have animal service and the namespace should be already there. And here it is. So what do you think if I go to home controller now and update this service to have an underscore? What will happen? Will that work? Let's see. It will not. And why is that? This is a classic error, by the way. Unable to resolve service for type That means that your dependency is registered incorrectly somehow. So when trying to activate home controller, so basically constructed, it was unable to resolve a service of animal service. Let's just go back to the code and see what happens. So we have a constructor that takes animal service, and that's exactly what I was talking about right now. In our startup class, we're telling the framework, if you see I animal service anywhere, use animal service to construct it. What I have done here, I have only placed a concrete implementation of animal service in here, not the interface. So it doesn't know what to do when see that. I'm kind of glad this happened because you could see that error. Okay, now run it. I'm pretty certain that it should work. So if I go to animals, works just fine. So what happened here? Because when you think about it, you have a home controller, and this home controller has got iAnimal service. It then knows through the startup class that if it sees iAnimal service, it should use animal service as a implementation of that interface. But there is something odd here. If I go to animal service, the constructor here is not parameterless. It's got iFarm API wrapper. So if it's constructing a home controller with iAnimal service using animal service class, then it has to construct animal service class. And how does it do that? Well, it does that because it knows that if it sees iAnimal service anywhere, which it does on the home controller, it should use animal service. And then if it sees iFarm API wrapper anywhere, it knows it should use farm API wrapper as the class or implementation because we told him to. That means that if now there is, let's say farm API wrapper has another dependency, and then that dependency has another dependency, normally then constructing a home controller would be a pretty horrific thing to do. But in this case, we just give it all the instructions in here and it resolves it without us moving our finger because it's got all the instructions in here. So we can construct the services without using the new keyword, without really providing the dependencies, which is great. The only place that you have to do it in will be the test class. But when you think about it, you do want that. In a lot of cases, you're going to be having to mock those services, not use the services constructed. And because you have to provide those here, you're able to do that. So you're still able to new up your class this way. But you can now, you have a choice of injecting it, which is absolutely amazing. And it's a game changer, I think. Okay, so what are the benefits of dependency injection? Let's say that our API, farm API wrapper, changed. Now we would like to use a different implementation of iFarm API wrapper because something's changed. The API changed completely, and while it still will be returning IEnumerable of animal, the implementation of that API, how it gets that data, changed. Or, I don't know, we want to use database instead. This is not an issue at all, because all you have to do is to create a new class in data access called, I don't know, new farm API wrapper, and then make it implement the interface of iFarm API wrapper, control dot, and just press implement interface, and let's just return a new list of animal. So it returns a new list of animal, it returns 0, list of length 0. But now we're still obviously using our farm API wrapper class. So we're using our alt class. So now if you're using dependency injection and you're not newing up your API like this, you can change one thing and one thing only, and it will replace how the API is used on every single call. And this is all you have to do. Bang, that's it. At the moment, every single time we'll encounter iFarm API wrapper in any class, it will construct a new farm API wrapper and not the old one. So, why do we use dependency injection? The code is more testable. You have seen how we can now identify the dependencies only looking at the constructor of the concrete class. When creating tests, all we have to do is to make sure we create mocks of the dependencies and specify return values for the methods and properties to ensure we're only testing the functionality of a system under test. Second one is the code is more maintainable. You just saw how easy it was to replace Farm API wrapper with new Farm API wrapper. It only took one line of code to reroute or point all instances of that interface to the new implementation of the interface. Any class that calls the iFarm API wrapper methods only care that they can call getAllAnimals method and that it returns an enumerable of animal. That's all they know and all they care about. And by implementing the iFarm API wrapper interface in new Farm API wrapper class, we make sure this is covered. And lastly, the code is more readable. You can see how much more readable the code is when you only specify the dependencies in the constructor of the class instead of skimming through the code looking for any new keywords and checking what's being newed up. So that's it for today. The video is a bit longer than I expected it to be, but I hope that I explained everything quite clearly and walked you step by step in how to implement that simple feature and then try to test it and sort of encounter issues while doing that, then converting the application into using dependency injection where we could unit test each unit, completely isolating it from other components. So I guess I'll see you next time.